Hi, everyone. My name is Mark Vina, CEO and Principal Analyst at Smart Tech Research. Today is Monday, September 23rd, 2024. Today, I'm joined by Francis Sadico, Partner and Principal Analyst at Tirias Research. First time Francis is appearing on my podcast. We're going to go into a topic that's very much in the news, and that's the rumors that happened that were kind of hit everybody like a ton of bricks, frankly, that there's apparently some rumors that some substantiated rumors, because it's coming from a very well-known news source, that Qualcomm may be in friendly acquisition mode on Intel. But before we do it, I'd like to introduce Francis. And Francis, again, welcome to the podcast. This is going to be an interesting topic for us to talk about. But before we do that, let me bring up a bit of a quick slide so you can talk about yourself. You and I have known each other for quite some time. Yeah. We both happen to live in Las Vegas.
Yes.
And which is a delight, I might say. And Francis actually was I would say he was a driving force for me to move here, but he's I think we're aligned that it's not a bad place to live for a whole. But that's a different.
Yeah, something fun, definitely.
Yeah, so nice not to pay property taxes. That's all I can say. Not property taxes, state income tax. You're going to pay property taxes. Yeah. Francis, so tell me about yourself and and educate the audience a little bit on Tirias Research.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. So just real quick, my background spans from everything from aerospace and defense to wireless communications to, running analyst organizations. So, have expertise both on the technical side, but also on the business management and P&L management side of things. So, when we talk about people or companies like Qualcomm or Intel, I bring a lot of that to bear. Both from a technical and business management side. As you said, so there, graduated from Loyola Marymount University, which is more well known, frankly, for their liberal arts, fine arts, and law, programs. But I found it to be actually a really strong, well-rounded engineering program, and we got to work. And this is where my aerospace defense comes in, because we got to work a lot with all the companies out there in El Segundo, like, Northrop Grumman and Raytheon and so forth. Yeah, exactly.
So Francis, you're not a rocket scientist. Is that what you're trying to say?
No, not even close to it. Not even close to it.
Well, anyway, let's get into this topic, because I think this is really interesting. I normally don't talk about issues that have been issues that have not been substantiated in some way. Francis, I know you feel the same way, but this is coming from the Wall Street Journal. The Journal doesn't report on stuff unless it has multiple sources, and very little is really known outside the fact that Cristiano Anon is apparently involved in these discussions. It really did hit me like a ton of bricks when I saw this story, only because you and I go back a few years, and if I had told you this was going to happen, or there was a kind of a dialogue about something like this happening, you would have said, Mark, you're nuts. You're drinking too much Kool-Aid back in San Jose, where I used to live. And so that's the thing. I think it's, surprising. And to me, this is more, and again, and Francis, I think you'll validate that. When we look at this from an analyst standpoint, we're not rooting for one company or other company to get out. We look at the facts. And the reality is that, there's a bit of a fall from grace type of thing. And we'll talk about that in a second. But what was your first reaction when you heard the news?
Yeah, frankly, I still think it's a little bit nuts. Even now, that was my initial gut reaction. There's obviously a lot of things that we can unpack, which we will over the next couple of minutes. But I think the biggest takeaway here really is that, like you said, however you think about these companies, it's a fact. Intel stock has dropped 55 to 60%, recently with the challenges that they've had. And that's what, whether it's Qualcomm or somebody else, whenever you have that kind of an impact to the value of the company, people are always going to look to see, okay, can they do this organically, or is it going to require outside intervention?
Right. Well, and the reality is that you look at this from a number of different perspectives. It's kind of been the perfect storm for Intel. You've had, I mean, admittedly, they've made a number of strategic miscues over the last decade. We'll go into a little bit of that in a second. But the interesting thing to me is that when I think about this, I think about the fact that, what could they have done a little bit differently to avoid getting into this situation. The other thing that I think really really it troubles me is that, and we're going to talk about whether this makes a lot of sense for Qualcomm, because there's another angle to this. If this is all true, and Intel is going to get acquired by Qualcomm, and again, the articles that have been written so far has been characterized as a friendly acquisition. Believe me, I've been involved with companies that have had friendly acquisitions on both sides. Friendly is not a word that I wouldn't bet my I wouldn't bet it on.
That's an oxymoron, Mark, and I've even been involved in acquisitions of coming together of equals, right? And even when they say that, there's always one party that's the acquirer and the other party that's the acquiree, and everything that goes along with that, and from a dynamic standpoint.
Yeah, it's kind of like that line. It was a famous line that was attributed to Ronald Reagan, and I think it's in the movie Reagan, which, by the way, is a good movie, where Reagan says, "How do you want to characterize the tensions between the Soviet Union then during the '80s and the United States?" And he said something to the effect, "We win, they lose."
Yeah.
So again, just to put a little bit of a cinematic spin on this, but let's go into the miscues. And I don't say this in a mean-spirited type of way, but let's face it, they've made a number of strategic errors, going back to the iPhone, going back to the even the MP3 player market, because they never had silicon that could play in that market. And there was a bit of arrogance, I think, in some ways, because their market share was so substantial in the 80s and 90s and up until the early 2000s that I don't think any company could avoid that type of arrogance. But they missed the MP3 market. They missed the iPhone market. They just missed, in general, the move toward ARM, which I think has created a lot of challenges. But even if you roll the clock back 12 months, and Pat Gelsinger, who just came back to Intel after he was a longtime Intel employee, he left and became the I think he was the CEO at VMware, if not mistaken, but then came back. One of the acknowledgments he made a few months ago when they had the announced they were laying off 15,000 people, and got to give him credit, he acknowledged that he misjudged the rise of AI, and I just I struggle with that. I mean, again, he's a very, very competent CEO, but that's a pretty stunning admission, and that's part of their challenge, in that they missed those issues. And then you layer on top of the fact that NVIDIA, I'm not going to say they came out of nowhere, but they've really capitalized, obviously, on the AI movement, and they have, in the data center AI space, what's their share? Upwards of 90%, if not more. So what's your reaction to that in general? I mean, do you think that? I want to get your perspective, because I don't mean this in a mean-spirited way. I still want to get Christmas cards from Intel. I hope.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things. One is it's probably less about miscues as opposed to their success, frankly. So Intel's success in the 80s and 90s have put them in a position where it was difficult, whether it was willfully or not, to address new areas, right? So and to your point on Pat and missing AI, I don't know that. See, the problem, one of the issues with Intel being having been so successful, is the cues on AI for somebody like a Pat or even previous CEOs of Intel needed to happen, frankly, 10 years ago. And because that's how long it takes to bring Intel's massive resources, capabilities, development projects, everything to bear leading up to this, right? So yeah, while somebody might say, "Hey, how could you miss AI?" It's you had to have been under the rock. Yes and no. You had to have seen this, a long time ago in order for Intel to intersect it at this point. Which you mentioned, Nvidia is actually what happened with Nvidia. They did not just come out of nowhere. Uh,
Right.
Jensen and Nvidia. Whether they fell into it or not, that's arguable. But with their success with GPU, and Jensen been talking about this road. Maybe he didn't call it AI at the time, but they've been on this road for a fair number of years, and happen to then now be able to drive it and then take advantage of it.
So on that note, do you think it's fair when again, you and I talked about this while we were in Berlin. I get the sense sometimes that Intel, and I know this is going to come across a bit harsh. I don't mean it this way, but well, it may come across this way. Does Intel still think it's 1995 from a foundry standpoint? Because they're one of the few companies out there that not only design their silicon, they manufacture their silicon, and that worked out quite well, frankly, because that competency of being able to manufacture the chips that you design, was an attribute that was very much part of their value proposition to the market, and it worked out quite well. I mean, the results, over the period between the 80s and call it the mid 2000s, I think paid off. But you have so many companies right now thriving in this foundryless model, whether it's Qualcomm, whether it's Nvidia, whether it's name the number of companies out there. Intel's an odd bird. And by the way, even if this acquisition happens, I don't really think that Qualcomm would want the foundry business. They would spin that off independently, which is, by the way, the plan is right now at Intel, independent of this. So do you think that's an unfair accusation, that they still think it's 1995?
Yeah, well, yeah, no, I don't think they think it's 1995. Clearly, Pat's one of them. He knows what he's doing, and he knows what's going on with the industry. So I don't think that's the case, and you can see that with some of the changes that they made, even while maintaining both the design business and the manufacturing business. But again, I think what Intel has, and it, just like any other company, you have your core competencies, right? And what you want to do is you want to find a way to match your core competencies and take advantage of it for whatever's happening in the market. Now, whether you're able to do that as a status quo or not, or whether you have to make some very difficult strategic decisions and moves, that's why a CEO or somebody of that caliber gets paid the big bucks, because they have to start making those decisions and making changes. And I think whether you argue it's too late or this is the point where they have to do that, I think Intel is at that stage in the game right now where they have to decide: do they want to be a premier leading chip and system design house, or do they want to be a premier and leading foundry? In the past, you've been able to do both, but I think the current situation, as we talked about in Berlin, is that with the competitive environment as it is right now and the speed of innovation,
Yes.
You can't do both well. And so I think, and like I said, like you mentioned, even independent of these rumors, Intel has already started to take steps towards potentially, separating the two businesses. They can't do that now. Let's be clear. They tried to do that now, it'd be even more disastrous.
Yeah. No. Yeah.
But just like anything else, you have to take the right steps if you want to ultimately get there, and they've started doing that.
Well, the interesting thing is, and this we'll get to the last slide in a second, because I want to talk about the upsides and downsides for Qualcomm should this all be true, is the fact that, and you and I talked about this quite a bit, it's very tough for a company to make real tough decisions with a management team. And I'm not just talking about the senior level. I'm going down, they're still a very large company. You have to really go down in 4 or 5 levels of the company to clean the management team out. And I don't mean that again in a derisive way, but when the Intel people that I still meet, how long you been with Intel? 15, 20 years. And when you've got people like that, 4 or 5 levels down, and I'm not advocating that. I don't want to see anybody lose their job. That's not my intent here. But having worked for several big companies, it's really hard to make decisions and be that canary in the coal mine that says, hey, by the way, the path that we're going down doesn't make sense. And I think I agree with you. I think the big decision they've got to make, independent of whether this turns out to be true, is that the expertise needed on the design side of the house versus the expertise on the manufacturing side. It's two different skill sets.
It's not just expertise; it's how you go to business, how you run your business, and how you architect your business. And I think it's less about time and tenure, as far as the ability to change, but it's more of the desire and the mindset to embrace change, and not just any changes. Sometimes change is bad, but to embrace a new strategy to move forward in the current competitive environment, right? Certain other companies that have successfully done the turnaround, I've gone to them, and you still have people there that are, every single person you talk to are 20, 30-year veterans, but it's the ability to then, and the desire to change and to make course corrections as needed. And yes, there's inevitably going to be shakeups. There's inevitably going to be, you need to bring new blood in, and especially in Intel's case, we've seen over and over again, there are 3 or 4 attempts at getting into the wireless business, for example, back in the 3G, even 4G days. We hear a lot. I'm not an Intel insider. I've never worked for Intel, but just as an outside observer, but also from different conversations within the industry, and what we've seen with some of these things is there's a lot of not invented here culture, and that's has to change. And some of that is bringing in external people, and frankly, they've started doing that. They just brought in HP's Justin Hotard to run their DCAI business, which I think is a big move. Obviously, he's bringing in probably his team of executives that go down 2-3 levels down from that. So I think those kinds of things, and then you get to a point where it could potentially be where Intel's at now, which is it an existential situation now where you don't have a choice but to make adjustments and to change. You can't rely on your previous success to continue to make sure you kind of go to the same path. You have to adjust.
Well, and I want to be fair again, because there is a distinct possibility that this could be a refreshing change for Intel for a whole variety of different reasons. Use a football analogy. 2 weeks ago, people were declaring that the New York Giants were going to be in big trouble, and they had they've now started to recover. They had a great game against the Browns yesterday. I'm very optimistic about how they're going to do this Thursday. We'll see how that happens. But things can turn around pretty quickly, and they do have a lot of talented folks there. I think they have made a couple of moves, like you've mentioned, where they're bringing in some folks out here that will not sing the party line. You and I talked about this as well a few weeks ago, that the 15,000 people that they've let go. Is it a peanut butter spread layoff, or is it strategic? And we all hope that it's strategic, because the people and the groups that you cut, or you lower the headcount, it's kind of an indication of where you're betting your company is from a strategy.
Well, that's what we're hearing, and we're even hearing that some more strategic groups are actually still building, even in that, because they need to, And the other thing about that is, it just like with any, I'm not saying specifically for Intel, with any move of that nature, where you're a fair amount of the headcount that is released sometimes are and there's incentives. I've been through some of these in working for some big companies where there's incentives where a fair number of that might be
Yeah.
people incentivized to be early retirement, for example. And again, to your point, that's another kind of positive in this situation where a lot of the maybe old blood, or the people that have been there for a while, there's kind of a refresh
Right.
that can happen because of this. So,
Well, I agree with you completely. People like to think Apple has been incredibly successful for their entire lifespan. That wasn't true back in the 2001, 2002 timeframe. I mean, their backs were against the wall. They even had to get a cash infusion, if you recall, from
yeah,
Microsoft. It was a very, very famous
yeah,
incident that happened there where, Bill Gates, I think it cost up $300 million and from Microsoft just to make the payroll, if I recall. And Apple was, when your backs are against the wall, you sometimes, a lot of companies respond in the most vigorous way possible, which is a positive thing. But let's kind of, conclude the podcast on some of the opportunities and risks for Qualcomm. And we were chatting before we began. I hit the record button. I'm not sure, from my perspective, this is the smartest thing in the world to happen. I look at that from a couple of different perspectives. A lot of it is from a corporate culture standpoint. You and I deal with Qualcomm all the time. They seem to be a much more, I wouldn't say they're highly risk oriented, but they know how to pivot quickly. And Intel, obviously being around for so long, the company historically has been a bit more has been a bit lethargic, let's say, in terms of sometimes having to do things that you have to do. So, I think there might be a corporate culture clash that may be challenging. I'm not sure from a top line standpoint, because Qualcomm right now is doing some really great stuff with their Snapdragon stuff, which has allowed them to really get into almost a performance leadership perspective in the mobile laptop space. They obviously know that's a very competitive space, and Intel is obviously has lots and lots of share in, but Qualcomm is giving Intel a run for the money. There's rumors that, not substantiated, that maybe at some point Qualcomm gets into the desktop PC space. That would be interesting. Intel obviously has great presence and share there, but I'm still, just given the history that acquisitions, in the tech space typically, don't pan out for a whole variety of different reasons. If I'm Qualcomm, I'm not sure this makes a whole lot of sense just based on what we know so far. And by the way, the thing that has also been reported is that, Apollo apparently is looking at doing a multi-billion-dollar cash infusion into Intel investment standpoint, which is another interesting element of this story, simply because nobody gives you $5 or $6 billion as an investment unless you want things in return. So that's a whole nother podcast, whether Intel would be up for accepting that money under the caveats that Apollo may desire. But what's your perspective on an opportunities and risk standpoint for Qualcomm? Should this all be true?
So let's start with that, Mark. That's a big if, right? I mean, this could literally be something as simple, a very, very small conversation that's been maybe blown up out of proportion. I think, I think, like you said, if we trust the Wall Street Journal, which I'm sure they have their reasons for having brought out this rumor. If I just look at the deal as a whole, there's a couple of things that just stand out. One is this would be from a deal structure standpoint, this would not be a simple deal.
No.
It's just too big of an acquisition for Qualcomm to be able to do this.
There's a lot of moving pieces, right?
In a simple, straightforward way. The first thing is I really don't think, from a manufacturing standpoint, you mentioned it earlier, if this were to happen, it would be bits and pieces that would become it, and there would need to be some very this is where this is where the complication comes in. There would need to be some very well thought out plans on how to deal with Intel's businesses should this happen. Not the least of which is some of the commitments that they've made to the U.S. government through the CHIPS Act.
Yes. Yes.
They are a strategic manufacturer, and you cannot. Global Foundries is the other one that's been in that conversation, given that they are domestic foundry suppliers, so that's a huge part of this. Okay, the other part is Intel is just, it's a big acquisition to bring in. Now, if we look at just capabilities, frankly, I agree with you. Intel's doing a lot of great things. Qualcomm's doing a lot of great things. I see some upside for Intel, just from a prospect of, hey, it's an external solution to some of their to where they're at right now. And whenever a company is in that kind of situation, the street is always going to be looking for, hey, how do they solve it, right? Again, can they do it organically, or do they need external infusion, whether it's from an investor or selling it off for pieces. But the only areas where I see this as a potential upside for Qualcomm is potentially in the PC space.
Right.
With the wealth of expertise and ecosystem, maturity that Intel has in that space, and then potentially in the data center where the Xeon processors are still a huge part of the data center, whether it's general purpose or accelerated for AI or whatnot. Qualcomm does have an AI 300 part for the cloud infrastructure part. Not saying that would be a piece that Qualcomm would necessarily run with, but with collaboration between those two teams, there potentially could be, kind of like they did with the HCX, right? That was the original PC part. That was almost like a proof of concept, or hey, what does it take to be successful in the PC market? And then they took those learnings, and out comes the X series, which is a more kind of holistic, well thought out go-to-market plan, in the PC. I could see something similar like that happening in the data center for Qualcomm, based on what they're doing with AA300, but then with the infusion of capabilities and expertise coming from Intel, potentially having something come out that's kind of more holistic. And then, from a foundry standpoint, one potential thing that could happen there is that gets split out. Maybe Qualcomm, starts using them at least for some of their products. Maybe there's some synergies or advantages that could be had from doing that they're not currently getting from their current foundry partners. But again, when you take the balance overall, the upside for Qualcomm just does not look like it's worthwhile for the risks, the challenges, the distraction that an acquisition of this magnitude would entail.
Yeah, I don't think it's obviously not a no-brainer. I think you did a really good job of kind of articulating, some compelling reasons why, they may have to think twice or three times whether this makes a lot of sense.
There's a lot going on here, Mark. There's a lot of moving parts, and the government with the foundry is a huge one, to be honest with you.
Right. And by the way, and I think that's actually a very, very salient point, is that the CHIPS Act, Intel has been cheerleading that for quite some time. It would create a bit of a mess if all of a sudden we can't do this, or will Qualcomm accept that responsibility? Clearly, I don't think that would happen. I think it would have to be an independent separation, which has been, and by the way, like you said, I don't think this is the right moment to do that. But anyway, I think this has been a good discussion. We just don't know a lot, and so I think as more information comes out of this, I think it'll be more interesting to see how this kind of plays out. But that's what makes this space fun. Never a dull moment.
Especially right now, there is a lot of things happening, a lot of dynamics in the market, more than we've seen, frankly, in the last 10, 20 years. So there's a lot going on.
Oh, yeah. Well, more to come on this. So, Francis, thanks for taking the time to join me for today's podcast.
Sure, thanks for having me.
No problem. For our viewing and listening audience, thanks for making the Smart Tech Check podcast part of your day or commute. Please make sure that you hit the like and subscribe buttons at the end of today's podcast, or use these on-screen QR codes to connect with me. You can also follow me on X at Marketing the Tech Guy. And until next time, have a great week. Thanks again, Francis.
Thanks a lot, Mark.